The long yard at Bastion Cross always smelled of hot metal and wet stone after the morning rain came off the ridge, and that was the smell I remember most from the day Commander Vosker decided my dog didn't belong in his formation. Bastion Cross sat on the treaty line at Rilla's End, one of the joint garrisons the compact ran with 3 species sharing the same wall, the same drill schedule, and, in theory, the same honor guard. Every quarter the Alliance sent inspectors through to watch the formation stand for review before the treaty renewal, and every quarter the handlers spent a week beforehand getting their animals ready to hold still for an hour under strange lights and stranger smells. It was the one morning a season where every species on the base pretended, briefly, that their animals were interchangeable parts of the same machine. Nobody believed that more than Vosker. I'd had Bruno 8 years. St. Bernard, brown and white, gray coming into his muzzle the last 2 winters. Built like a door somebody forgot to finish. He was not fast. He was not flashy. He sat at the end of the 3rd rank with his weight back on his haunches, ears soft, watching the gate the way he watched everything, like it might, eventually, be interesting, but he wasn't going to hold his breath over it. Half the handlers on base liked to joke that I'd brought a rug to a review instead of a working animal. I never argued that point either. It never seemed worth the breath. Vosker commanded the review that quarter. Threllan by birth, plated the color of old iron down the ridge of his skull, the kind of officer who walked a formation line like he was inspecting rifles instead of animals, pausing at each handler just long enough to make sure they'd noticed him pausing. His own war beast, a Korvax bull named Ashkur, that stood taller at the shoulder than I stood at the head, held the 1st rank beside him, chained to nothing, trained instead to a discipline so total it barely blinked. Vosker was proud of that. He said so, often, to anyone who'd hold still long enough to hear it. And he was not wrong to be proud. Ashkur was, by every measure the compact used, the most dangerous animal on the base, and Vosker had built a good part of his reputation on having raised him from a pup. He stopped in front of Bruno with the inspectors 2 steps behind him, and he said, loud enough for the whole rank to hear, that the honor line was for war beasts, not household animals, and that mine would be reassigned to freight duty before the ceremony started. One of the inspectors, a slate-skinned envoy I didn't recognize, actually laughed, a short dry sound like something breaking. Vosker didn't ask my opinion on any of it. He gave the order like it had already happened, the way men give orders when they've never once had one refused. I didn't argue with him. There wasn't a version of that conversation where arguing helped, and Bruno wasn't the kind of dog who needed me to defend him out loud. I said, "Copy, Commander," the way you say it to anyone giving an order you have no intention of treating as up for debate, and I kept my hand loose on the lead. And Bruno kept sitting there like the whole exchange was weather passing over, which, as far as he was concerned, it was. The inspectors moved down the line. Vosker moved with them, already telling the story of Ashkur's bloodline to anyone who'd listen, already treating the matter of my dog as settled and beneath further comment. I want to be clear that I didn't do anything in that moment. I didn't signal Bruno, didn't reposition him, didn't so much as shift my weight. He does that part himself, mostly. I only gave him the one word later, and by then it almost didn't matter what I said. It was maybe 4 minutes on, 3 ranks down, when the Ivric stalker hound assigned to the perimeter squad, a lean, quill-backed animal that had never in 2 years of joint drills looked at anything but its own handler, turned its head toward Bruno and held it there. Its handler tugged the lead, twice, harder the second time. The stalker hound didn't move its head back. A minute after that, 2 of the scaled coursers from the border patrol kennel, animals bred for exactly the kind of total obedience Vosker liked to lecture about, broke their own line without command and drifted, slow and unbothered, 3 meters closer to where Bruno sat, ears forward, tails still. Nobody but me and the handlers noticed at first, because none of it looked like anything worth noticing. No animal barked, no animal lunged. They simply, one at a time, stopped attending to the review and started attending to the old dog at the end of the 3rd rank, the way a compass stops arguing with itself once it finds north. Vosker noticed when Ashkur did it. The Korvax bull had held that 1st rank without so much as a twitch through 6 years of quarterly reviews, by every account the steadiest animal the garrison had ever fielded. He was still holding it, chin level, gaze forward, right up until the inspectors were 4 meters from him, at which point he turned his enormous head down the length of the yard, found Bruno at the far end, and simply lowered himself, forelegs folding first, until his chin rested flat against the paving stones. Not a threat display. Not distress. He looked, if anything, relieved, the way a soldier looks when somebody finally tells him he's allowed to stand down after a long watch. Vosker's voice caught somewhere in the middle of a sentence about bloodlines and didn't finish it. The slate-skinned envoy who'd laughed earlier wasn't laughing anymore. Nobody on the review line moved. For a long moment, the only sound in the long yard was wind coming off the ridge and 40 animals breathing. I gave Bruno the word then, mostly because the silence had gotten long enough that somebody needed to move first, and it felt wrong to make him do it alone in front of that many strangers. I said, "With me, quiet," the way I always said it at the end of every drill we'd ever run together, and Bruno got up off his haunches, unhurried, like he had all day, and walked the length of the yard past 4 species worth of frozen review line animals, none of whom so much as turned their heads to watch him go, because every one of them was already watching him. He stopped in front of Ashkur. The Korvax bull, still down on the stones, huge and gray-scaled and utterly still, lifted his chin an inch and set it back down beside Bruno's front paw, and that was the whole of it. No sound, no motion anyone would call dramatic. Just an 8-year-old Saint Bernard standing over an animal 3 times his size that had just decided, on its own, without instruction from anyone in a uniform, exactly where the line of authority actually ran. Vosker didn't reassign him to freight duty. He didn't say anything else about it in front of the inspectors, and the review, once it finally started, went the way reviews always go, quiet, orderly, forgettable, except that Ashkur held the first rank a half step out of position, angled toward the third, for the whole hour. I heard later, from one of the kennel techs who owed me a favor, that Vosker spent a long stretch of that evening in the garrison zoology office, asking their one xenobiologist to explain, in terms he could accept, why a domestic earth breed with no combat training, and no bloodline anyone on this side of the treaty had ever heard of, could make his prize warbeast fold like that without raising its voice, without so much as a growl. She apparently told him what she'd tell anyone, that dominance among bonded animals isn't always about size or teeth, that some hierarchies get decided by something closer to instinct than argument, and that Ashkur, given the choice, had simply picked the animal he recognized as senior. Vosker didn't care for that answer. I don't think there was a better one available. Nobody offered me an explanation, and I didn't ask for one. I'd had 8 years with Bruno by then, watched him do some version of this quietly, in smaller rooms, more times than I could count, and the honest truth was I still didn't fully understand it myself, only that it happened, reliably, and that it never once required him to bare a tooth or raise his voice to get there. The garrison never officially changed the seating chart for reviews after that, but nobody enforced the old one either. Bruno held the end of the third rank, same as always, weight back, ears soft, watching the gate like it might eventually be interesting. Ashkur took to holding position beside him instead of beside Voskar, on his own initiative, every quarter after, and nobody on the inspection team ever asked why, and nobody in the garrison brought it up to the commander's face again. I still walk that yard most mornings. Bruno is slower now, gray further up past his muzzle every year, and he still sits exactly where he wants to sit, and every animal on that base, without being told, still gives him the room to do it.